All right, hello, welcome to the next Nix Hour. Today, nobody here has a question, so we'll look at the Nix Hour repository again, at the most upvoted issues. Feel free to add your own issues as always, or upvote existing ones. This time, we will look at Nixos modules. So we have a question here about how these options, these parametrized options, work underneath. And like, how is it that the module system can check that these sub options are valid? Like, is normal user extra group? How does it know that? How is this defined? And then another thing is extending these placeholder options. So like, what if a user would want to extend each of the users with an additional option that has some new functionality? Yeah, and also list some examples here. Also, why is it that users is repeated? What is the difference to extra users? I think let's maybe start with the easiest thing here, just extra users. So that's a historical thing. I believe originally it was called extra users, but then it was renamed to users or something like that. Let's look at it in the context here. So we'll just go into Nix packages. Let's look at, oh, I have a lot of files to unstash apparently, or to stash. But yeah, let's go into Nix packages. Let's look at
browser right now.
Oh, good point. Thanks for mentioning. I need to share my entire screen. Yeah, so let's go into modules and let's look at the users, user Nix module. Where is it? User groups. So generally, rep grep is my way to search for things. And in this case, we want to look for the users option. And this might work with something like this. And yeah, that kind of gets us the right listing. I'm going to pass -L to list the files. And oh, we can see here, config users groups. That looks pretty good. So we look at, this is where the users option is defined, down here. So that's defined here. And now where's extra users? It's up here. So there's this kind of these special functions in the model system that allow you to rename and deprecate old options. So in this case, there's extra users, but it was aliased to users.users. And there's various kinds of these. So this is make alias option module, MD for Markdown. Make alias option module, I believe that allows you to still use both. It doesn't throw a warning if you use the old one. We can also, let's try this out here. So I'm gonna write a small configuration.nix, and I'm just gonna do, let's say, file systems, just so we don't get, well, let's do it without this for now. So users, let's say finicell, and let's give it a is normal user equals true. And let's try evaluating this. So I'm going to use Nix build. I'm going to build the Nix.os directory. This way I can pass my configuration just like this. And I'm going to actually not Nix build, I'm going to Nix instantiate. I don't want to actually build the entire configuration. I just want to evaluate it into a derivation. And I'm going to evaluate the system attribute. That's the main one of the system. If I do that, I should get these assertion failures. If I write modules, or if I try to debug modules, or just have a very simple configuration.nix, I usually pass some random options for these. So here I'm going to do file systems.root.device equals something. and also boot.loader.drop.device equals nodef. Okay, this special thing. This way, file systems with uppercase S. All right. State version, system.state version, also a good thing to set. I'm just testing here, so I think it's fine. And so this works. We get the resulting derivation. Now let's also try using extraUsers. And this should also work the very same way. Yes. But now let's say we go into this module. Let's open this in a separate window. Config users groups, extra users. So now let's use the make renamed option module down here instead. If I remember correctly, this should make it give you an error message or a warning if you use the old option here. So let's go back here. We have changed this now internally in Nix packages. And let's try evaluating this again. And we get a warning here. The option users.extraUsers defined in blah, blah, blah has been renamed to users.users. This is not the case currently because it's an alias, which doesn't make this warning message, but this, you will sometimes see this in modules. And this is something you can do to deprecate all options. In this case, I think we might look at the historical context here as well. So let me do a git blame here. Git blame. Actually, we will. This is a bit annoying because it's probably gonna be. Yeah, we might have to go back quite a bit. I do like using GitHub sometimes for this. GitHub has this neat functionality where let's go to this location, some modules, config, and it was in users groups down here. So when you can select the line, then you can go up here, click on blame. This is the same as git blame, but then there's this very useful button here, view blame prior to this change, which allows you to go back to right before the last change. And the last one we have here that just adds make alias option module markdown. We are not interested in that. So let's go back to a previous one. And where is it? It's down here. And oh yeah, that's actually my commit. So that's going to be a bit annoying because I moved these around at that point. Yes, actually, this is going to be pretty annoying. So yeah, let's not dig further into that. But yeah, so this is generally done to deprecate old options, to find better names for new options. In this case, I think some more context is that extra users historically has been extra users in addition to the ones mutably declared on the system. And this also relates to the mutable users option, mutable users. Where is it here? Mutable users is by default it's set to true, which allows you to also add users using things like user add commands and things like that. And that's kind of impure because you aren't declaring all of the users of your system ahead of time in your configuration.nix. But this is the historical default. I do recommend setting this to false if you really only want the users declared on the configuration.nix. But yeah, the extra users kind of expressed that these were extra declarative users in addition to the mutable ones. But now that it's kind of more common to make everything declarative, it makes more sense to have this just be users. So that kind of rename was probably done because of that. That would be my my thoughts. And so why users.users? Why is it that repeated? That simply comes from the fact that there's other useful options related to users. And so we just saw this. We have mutable users, for example. We could set this to true. And there's others. If we go into configuration.nix, we should see more. So users dot, let's search for that. And scroll down all the way. Users, oh, it's users dot. Okay, yeah. So we have allow no password login, default user shell, and so on. So it's a lot of extra options that aren't just the user declarations. That's why that is kind of nested. Let's see here. We have, so this is answered. Okay. Okay, now let's go into the kind of more how do these nested parameterized options work? And I think to do this, let's actually try to write our own. So this is we started with this Nix module. Now let me just comment out things we don't necessarily need right now. And so module systems, you can, in all the modules, even in your configuration.nix, you can declare your own options. And you do this using the options attribute. But if you do this, you also need to nest all of the declarations under a config attribute. Otherwise, it's going to complain about it kind of being ambiguous what these mean. Although in this case, it wouldn't be that ambiguous. I mean, we can, yeah. So under options, you declare your options. Options you declare using lib.makeOption. But we need to actually name these options something. So let's call it my user option. And you can nest these options arbitrarily deep. So each module evaluation has an option tree that can be arbitrarily deep. So we can also call this my.user.option. Or if you want to nest them a bit more, you can say my.user equals, and then all the options you want to list here. Now, it's probably not call the option itself. That's a bit confusing. So let's call it my user option. And so lib.makeOption takes some arguments. Actually, we need to import lib here. You do this by adding an argument list at the top here. You're going to add lib and then ... to ignore the rest. And so when you declare an option, the most important thing is a type. And honestly, essentially all the other attributes are optional and aren't needed, but a type is the most important one. There is a default type, but it's kind of bad to use that default type. It doesn't have very good merging behavior. So yes, type recommended. And so there's lots of standard types. We have integer types, checks against things being integers, and so on. We also have types that do some merging. So, I mean, if you have an integer and let's say we inner config down here, we say my.user option equals 0. And that works. Let's evaluate this. Oh, it doesn't because I have some extra, oh, here, missing semicolon. So that works. But now let's say we have another module. So let's add an import statement here. And let's do our module here does my.user option equals 1. Now if that happens, it's going to give an error. Oh, actually it won't give an error. So the Nix is lazy, right? And so it won't evaluate what isn't needed. And there's nothing that actually needs this option. And we could make it be used by using this in our system somewhere. So for example, we might do env. Wait, is that right? Oh, etc. And then let's do the number. So we create a file in /etc called the number. We're gonna do the text of it should be the string of the my user option. But now we can't just refer to my user option like this. I mean, we also have this declaration down here. The module system will take care of kind of merging and creating these values in the right way. And so in the end, how you can access these final values is by adding the config argument .here and then using config.my.userOption. Notably, the config here is different from the config here. The kind of difference is that this config is a local attribute declaration just for this one module. I mean, this has just these couple keys here. It's yes, and this config here, that's the one that has all the modules merged together. So we have my user option here. We have let's say environment.system package here. All the options, all the values of all the options are available in here. Yes, so yeah, so we can do this, and once we have that, it should actually evaluate it. Yeah, now we can actually see the error message that it gets. It complains about the option has conflicting definition values. So we have one time it's 1 and one time it's 0, and it can't merge these together. And this is in contrast to other options like, let's say, lines, for example. So lines is an option type that can merge together multiple strings by concatenating them with new lines. So let's do foo here, and down here, let's do a bar. When we try this, well, we don't need the toString here anymore. It's already a string. This should now evaluate, yes. Yeah, and so that's kind of option merging. But now let's look at the kind of nested options. And so for this, there's a bunch of, well, kind of two main types that can be used for this. The main one really is attrsOf, though. So attrsOf is an option type that allows you to define an attribute set with arbitrary keys, but a kind of nested module as the values. So let's look at this a bit closer. So, well, actually, no, attrsOf is just for arbitrary attribute sets with arbitrary keys, but a specific type as values. So in here, we can say lib.types.int. And so by doing this, this would give an error. We need to instead set an attribute here. So the keys that are allowed are arbitrary. So we can say foo equals 10, and let's set down here, let's do bar equals 20. Actually, can we, let's move this a bit further up here. Yeah, and so this still works. It will give an error because we can't, it's not a string. Oh, actually, none are strings. Oh, yes. So in this case, the environment.etc option or the text option here doesn't have the right type. So we'd have to like, we could do a lib.generators.toPretty to kind of pretty print the attribute set. And that should then work again. And let's actually, so we currently are evaluating the system here. Let's actually change this a bit. So I'm gonna do Nix instantiate plus -- eval. So we can actually see the evaluated value. And let's do config.my.userOption. This kind of gets rid of some of the intermediate things. Oh, and let's also add -- strict. All right, so we can see the resulting value here. in the user option. And here we can see it merged these two things together correctly. But now there's also some kind of useful functions in the module system. Like let's say we have another foo here. Let's pick foo equals 5. So what should happen here? Because so the bar here is unique to this one, but we have a conflict at the kind of foo attribute. So if we try this, we will get an error, and it says we have conflicting values. Now earlier we saw that we kind of resolved, but not really. We resolved the conflict by just picking a type that has that can be merged together. In this case, let's do it another way, and that is using lib.makeDefault or lib.makeForce. So all assignments have a default priority in the module system. That's the one you get when you don't add any of these. But you can also override this priority by using makeForce or makeDefault. And there's also makeOptionDefault, although that's not that often used. So in this case, let's say we have a makeDefault, so a lower priority. And let's see what happens. Yeah, so it prioritizes the 10 here, whereas if we were to do makeForce, it would prioritize the 5. Yes, and so the attrsOf type takes care, or it makes sure that each of the values, each of the attributes get merged independently of each other, so that even if, bar doesn't have a conflict here, and we then need to resolve bar. But you could also see that we have this entire option, this entire attribute set, and this entire attribute set, and these kind of conflict with each other, but we can kind of recurse into the conflict and resolve them more specifically. All right, so that's attrsOf. Now let's look at, well, let's look at something independently. Let's do let's do sub options. So another useful type, and it's going to be useful later to talk about this, is lib.types.submodule. And so a submodule is like an entire separate module evaluation nested inside a single option. And so in here, we can have our own kind of nested set of options again. And this is entirely independent of the options on the entire NixOS level. And so here we can say, okay, let's say in the sub options, we have a Baz option. And we again need to use make option like default. This is just like every other module. We need to give a type. So let's say lib.types.int again. And we can also have, we can also have config here. So we can do config. We can assign Baz here directly. Let's do like a 10. So this is kind of like a default, but it's set here. So it acts a bit differently. Yeah, and so this works, and we can also now we've declared this option. Let's evaluate this. Let's go into here and let me add strict here -a config.my.sub options. Oh, and now we can see is used but not defined. So in this case, this option itself was never defined. We assigned a type, but there's no value. And arguably, this is kind of something that should be fixed, fixed or made more convenient, because it's an obvious default here is just an empty module. And this can just be an attribute set here. And yeah, once we have this, it works. We get, well, the empty module, but we also set kind of this default value in here. So underneath, what it does is that it takes this module here and combines it with all the modules you provide in the definitions. So I mean, let's try it out here. Let's do. Well, this is a bit messy. Let me do config here. So config.my.sub options, and let's do config.bas equals lib.make force 20. So now we have 3 modules. Now let's look at this. Oh, that doesn't work. Oh, it's already defined down here. Let's comment this one out for now. Oh, suboption.config doesn't exist. Oh, yes, that's a bit weird, but maybe we can get to that later. So we can get the result here. Bas is equals to 20, and this is a result of combining 3 modules. There's for one, well, this is module 1. That's the just this MP attribute set here. Module 2 is this option declaration here, and module 3 is this here, module 3. Let's move this right here. The submodule. So question: what arguments do the submodules get as a config? And so we haven't seen this yet here, but we can also access the config in here. So config .. And so this is the local config to the submodule. So in here we could do, I mean, let's say, let's declare another option. Let's call this result. Like this type lib.types.int as well. And now we could, for example, do result is equals to config.bas plus 1. So this means it's still gonna evaluate these 3 modules, 1, 2, 3 together, and there's nothing from the kind of global space that can influence this at that point. And yes, it's gonna assign, well, there's one result declaration, but it depends on the Bas option. The Bas option has a kind of default value that's set here and nowhere else. And so if we do this, we get that the result is Bas plus 1. And yeah, so that's essentially submodules. And these are, well, let's talk a bit more about this. So this is kind of getting a bit big here. Sometimes we might want to split this into a separate file. This also works. Files themselves are also valid module references. And so we could take this entire thing here and we could move this to a separate file and then do just the file.mix. Also, sometimes you might want to have multiple modules in here. And we can also do this. We can just specify a list here and then have more modules here, the other file. There is also, so the submodule type here existed for a longer time, but there is also a newer type that can be used to be a bit more explicit and strict about it. And that is submodule with. And so submodule with takes an attribute set where you can explicitly say, these are the modules that I want. So we could give all the files here. And submodule with, there's a notable difference that also allows special args to be passed. We had a question, is it equivalent to imports? Yes. Passing multiple modules is the same as just importing multiple modules inside a single module. In the end, it all gets turned into a list of modules. But the submodule with allows you to pass special args. So you can pass some foo. And so special args, you often don't need this. There's also, so see, we can do config.module.args. This also allows you to pass arguments. And this is generally recommended over special args if possible. In some cases, that's not possible. So if you have a case where you need to override lib, for example, that's a case where special args is needed. Yes. Let's go back here a little bit. I want to get back my original module here. Question, how do you pass module args to submodule only? To pass module args, you would just pass it in the submodule here. So config.module.args.foo equals 20. And then just to demonstrate it, we could access foo in here. Let's do plus foo. And this works. And so there is something a bit special here. So let's go back to just this here. So we want to declare something in here. Now let's try to use options. So I mean, this is like any other module itself. Modules can declare options. So let's try this. Let's do nested equals lib.make option. And type equals lib.types.int. All right, and now let's also do config. Or let's pass a default here. Default equals 0. And now what happens? We get an error. And so the error is a bit bad, to be honest. But so it complains about the options not existing. And so this is a bit weird, but it is useful in a lot of cases. And so underneath, what the module system does with submodule, so lib.types.submodule, is that it nests all of the attributes under a config key. So this gets desugared to let's do this, to config equals this. And once we know this, we can kind of see why we get this error, because in this case, option kind of looks like an actual option name and not an option declaration. And so ways to get around this is you can, so let's go back to this. You can make it a function. If it's a function, this kind of special case doesn't kick in. So even if we just have this, it's gonna, oh, it's used but not defined. Let's do, oh, result is not defined. Let's delete this. So yeah, that works. Another way to get around this is to, so yeah, I mentioned this earlier. Submodule with is kind of nearer than submodule, and submodule with doesn't do this special casing by default. So if we do here and let's set modules, let's make it the same as before, like this. If we do this, I believe, well, even without this, yeah, even without this, it's going to work. Yeah, you can also opt into this special casing behavior. I think there's a, well, it's documented on the, let's actually look at this briefly. NixOS manual. So we have option types, yeah. So there's documentation for pretty much all of these types. So we saw here some basic types. We have a bunch of interesting ones. We have integers. We use this a lot. Then strings, we saw this here. We also see the documentation shows you how they get merged together. Now here, submodule. This shows the, right, so in the end, it's sugar for this kind of thing, where this also implies some sugar. So we have special args here. You can see all the how it works a bit more closely. We have attrsOf here. There's also related lazy attrsOf. This is sometimes useful. Please take a look at the warning there. Yeah. Also, some more special documentation on submodule. I can recommend taking a look at that. Yeah. But so we saw a bunch of things. But the main question was how these nested user declarations, for example, work. And so this happens when we let me comment things out. Well, it's getting a bit messy. Let me sure. So the user well, can we do this? I believe options equals. Yeah, let's kind of push this to the bottom. So this happens when we combine the two types we saw earlier. So we combine attrsOf with submodule. And well, this doesn't work. We need to pass an actual submodule here by default. Well, we can pass empty here. That would also be valid, but usually is not what you want. You usually want to have some options in these. Well, let's try it out. What happens here? So let's say now config. Let's also make this a bit smaller so we don't have too much nesting going on. Config.my.user option equals. Well, we can't really do anything. We can set modules as before. Well, actually, this won't work. So we have attrsOf now. So actually, this should be some arbitrary attribute name. We can pick this, and then that's the subtype, the type of the attribute values that's here. And so we can try this. Let's do my sub. Oh yeah, my user option. This my already defined. Let me comment out all of this. Like this. All right, so we can see it works. We can do anything here with these through. Yep. Yeah, but we don't have anything in here. So as soon as we try to pass something here, bar equals 10, it's gonna fail because blah 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 does not exist. So it complains about this specifically, that the bar option doesn't exist. We also have blah blah blah. Yeah, okay, this is actually not relevant. So yeah, usually you would define some option in here. So let's define the bar option. Make option type equals lib.types dot int again. Actually, let's vary this a bit up. Let's pick enum 1, 2, 3. So yeah, now this should work. Or not. Where is it? Oh, here. So yeah, we can see that indeed has bar in here. We can also do the fancy things using make default and so on. Well, in this case, it's not that useful. There's no other definition. We might have a default here. Let's pick 0 as a default, well, which is actually not valid. Let's delete this one here so that the default applies. Now let's, actually, this is a good opportunity to show off. So if a user were to specify bar here, the user definition would, of course, take priority. Even when they use a lib.make default, that still takes priority. So yeah, it's still 1. Oh, yeah, still 1. And so this is because underneath this default here, desugars to this, to config.bar equals lib.make option default. So this is kind of the main use case for lib make option default. because it's essentially this. And so this also means that if we want to kind of, well, let's trigger a merge conflict, we can do this by also setting a conflicting value with the same priority here. So if we do this, we get the conflict here. This is the same error we get when we just have a default specified up here. Let's try this. Yes, we have, again, conflicting definition values. It's generally, the default here is useful when you have like some kind of constant default that never changes, but sometimes you want to have a kind of more dynamic default, or let's say config.bar equals lib.make if. Let's say we have a default, but only if some other condition holds. So I don't know, make if true or make if false. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but here we could then have lib.make default 1, something like this. But so this is pretty much how these options are defined. So if we go, well, of course, here we can do the same things as before. So if you want to pass some options here, we could declare this here, but then this doesn't work. Well, multiple reasons. Options doesn't work because, again, we have the same thing here, where if there's options and other config declarations, we need to nest this under config for it to work. But also we have this thing going on where submodules, so types.submodule, this is nesting under config entirely. So this would be equal to config equals this entire thing, which is not what we want. So we need to kind of make that not be a thing by either using the function thing, or if we can also use submodule with. So I guess let's look at the user option here. Let's go to config user groups. Let's do users equal here. So yeah, we can see this here. So the type of it is attrsOf submodule with user opts. So in this case, it uses a variable name. So let's see, where is this defined? Up here. So we can see, these are the name, description, UID is system user, and so on. These are all the options. We can also see, this is very important. So there is a kind of special case. Let's go back to our example here. So in a lot of cases, you want to be able to know the variable name that you're using inside here. Let's say you might want to have a default that is the variable name, or actually in this case, name. So this is a fairly common pattern. You want to be able to have a name option inside the submodule, and name is it's a string, and the default should be the attribute name. And for this, there is, let's comment this out. So let's add arguments here. So let's do ... for now. And let's also, we need to parenthesize this, otherwise it's going to have an error. And yeah, so this is a special argument that gets passed to submodules. And this argument here is the name of the attribute from the attrsOf kind of parent type, so to say. And so this is how you can set a default according to the name here. And so let's try this. And we can see here, yes, we have some arbitrary username, and the nested name option is exactly that. And yeah, the user option here also does that. So here we see user opts, that's the submodule, and in the submodule we have access to the name here, and it's going to use that name for something. It's set it down here with a make default. Not sure why it's done using a make default, but yes. Yeah, and so that's, yeah, so if we look at this in the manual, let's go down here, let's do users.users. I guess this. Yeah, so if you look at the users.users option, we can see here the type is an attribute set of submodule. And how the manual renders this. So theoretically, the type should kind of include all of the options. So this field in here should be like all of the documentation down here, because that's really what it is. All these sub options are part of the type of the parent option here. But because that's really hard to read, and this is kind of how it works instead, where the kind of name of the attribute is kind of filled in with a template thing, and then the sub options are written down here. And so every time you see this kind of special name thing, that means that the users.users option here is an attribute set of a submodule. And this happens quite a bunch of times. This is a very common thing in Nix.os. So let's search for just name here. We can see there's, actually, can we see the number of matches? No. But it's like all over the place. Also, we used this like for file systems as well just earlier. We also used this for environment.etc. That's another one. Let's fill it up here. Yeah, environment.etc is also a submodule, an attribute set of submodules. And this does work fairly well, I'd say. Yeah. We have, so there was, I think that should pretty much answer the main bits here. But there's also, yeah, so how does one extend it and extending these options? So let's specifically look at this. So they want to add this new option to all of the users. And so for this, we're going to do something we haven't seen yet, and that is option merging. And so the module system cannot just merge definitions like we've seen. So we did this earlier with we had another imports here where we had another module and we could have more definitions here. So we could have config.my.user option dot another attribute equals something. And this works, and it's going to merge. It's going to merge these definitions together and return the combined result. But the module system can also merge types together. So not only can we add another declaration here, we can also add another type. Well, the same type. So let's do the same thing here. Let's move this down so we can see the entire thing a bit better. So let's do the same thing. So options.my.user option equals lib.make_option. Just copying the one from up there. Type is lib.types.attrsOf and then lib.types.submodule. Actually, let's first try something else. Let's try attrsOf lib.types.int. So we can see that we have the same option declared multiple times, but with a different type. Let's see what happens. It's going to complain that the option is already declared. The error could be better. It also kind of indicates that the types can't be merged together. But if we change this to submodule, and then let's keep it empty for now, this then works. So you kind of need the same. Well, this makes really the most sense when you have submodules. It also works for enumerations, I believe. Like if you have multiple enums. Let's look at submodules. So yeah, this is this is like a user module here, but you can just extend the option set here. So if we, for example, let's copy this one, authorized principals. So let's options.OpenSSH authorized principals. Let's create this option here. Make option type is, I think that was a list of strings, and probably a default as well. And yeah, so I guess now there's still the question on how to apply this. Like currently we only declare the option. We aren't actually using it for anything yet. Oh, and actually this is, yeah, we aren't assigning users. Let's do users. Options.users.users equals this. And I guess then let's try config.users.users.finicil. Doesn't exist. So let's also say we have users.users finicil. Then again, it's normal user. Oh, that's a lot of output. Oof. Did I make a mistake here? It is a bit messy, to be honest. Let me slim this down a bit. Let me lower the indentation here. Move this down here. Let's again comment out a bunch of things. Okay, so it should only be this now. Oh, no, still not. Let me actually evaluate system again. So let's not eval, let's do instantiate, and let's do system. Oh, now we have this file system thing that we need. File system. Let's insert this. Config.file system, config.boot.loader. All right, so that works, but we haven't actually used this option anywhere. We might say OpenSSH authorized principals. Let's do. I'm not entirely sure what this option would do, but for example, we could do this. Let's say environment.etc and then authorized principals dot text equals, and then let's do some transformation here. Let's do, so we need to get all the users. So let's do config.users.users. Now let's do a lib.map address to list. So we get all of the usernames and the config. I guess that's a good way to call it. Now in here, let's create a let's say create a string, and then we do name equals toString. This is not great because it's using the implicit space concatenation of the toString here, but it's quick and fast for now. And then this doesn't work entirely. We need to also concat strings. All right, and so let's try this. Does this evaluate? Yes, it does. Okay, then let's do our final thing. We're almost out of time. We're gonna actually build this, and we're gonna build environment.etc. Actually, I don't think that can be built. Let's build the entire system. I hope it doesn't take too long. Probably. Yeah. Oh, that's decent. Maybe. But yeah, so this, let's look at it again. Oh, we can't open it because it's open in the other Vim. It's almost done though. Actually, no, the manual has to get built. Never mind. I believe it should be possible to just build etc. Let's see, config dot. Oh, I think it's in system.build.etc. Yes, here it is. This is what I wanted. Oh, it still has to build the manual. Never mind. But yes, so this is how you could kind of use this new option you created. Another way to use it is also to extend use the option in the submodule itself. So you might change this to a function here and add config. And then you could, for example, say here, config.users or extra groups is an option. You could say here that's config.OpenSSH.authorized principles. Yeah, that might work like that. It should, yeah. Maybe also make default, so users can override it when necessary. Although my general recommendation is to not use lists when possible. In this case, I'd probably use an address of lib.types.bool. This way, you can specify these things like this, authorized principles.foo equals true. And this way you can also override this later on. So you could say in another module, you could say the same thing, but false, and then this would give conflict, but you can say make force false. With lists, this isn't possible, and so I recommend attribute sets. But yeah, we are out of time. I hope that covers, I think that should cover this question. But yeah, if you have any more, please feel free to open another issue or yeah. Well, thanks for joining, and see you in the next hour.